You wake up in a place you can afford. Not a dream apartment. Not a tiny one either. Just normal. The rent is what people say is reasonable for the area. It fits the range. It makes sense. You make coffee at home because that's the responsible choice. You're not wasting money on daily extras. You're doing what's expected. You get dressed in clothes that aren't cheap, but aren't expensive. They last. They work. They're normal. You drive a car that runs. Nothing fancy. Nothing new. Either it's paid off, or the payments fit the budget you were told to follow. You stop for gas. You go to work. At lunch, you don't go out. You brought something from home. You're being smart about it. After work, you stop for groceries. Not premium. Not bottom shelf. Just normal choices people make every day. You pay. You go home. Later, you open the bills. Internet. Phone. Insurance. Utilities. Subscriptions you actually use. Nothing here feels indulgent. Nothing feels reckless. Nothing looks like a mistake. Everything is regular. Everything is necessary. And still, when you look at the number in your account, it feels smaller than it should. You're not living beyond your means. You're not buying things you don't need. You're doing what's considered responsible. And somehow, it still feels expensive. This is what a normal financial routine looks like. Money comes in on schedule. Bills go out on schedule. Most of it is automatic now. Rent, utilities, insurance, phone, internet. Nothing unusual. Nothing excessive. There are subscriptions that feel reasonable. Things that save time. Things that make life easier. Streaming, cloud storage, apps that quietly renew every month. They don't feel optional anymore. They feel built in. Groceries happen every week. Fuel happens whenever it needs to. Maintenance shows up when something stops working. None of it feels like a decision. It feels like maintenance. Spending doesn't happen in big moments. It happens in small, predictable ones. Over and over. Most purchases are justified before they're made. This is necessary. This is practical. This is normal. There's no moment where it feels like money is being wasted. Just moments where money is being used. Convenience replaces friction. Predictability replaces choice. And slowly, spending becomes part of the background. Like noise you stop hearing. Money leaves quietly. Not in chunks, but in steady, controlled amounts. That don't trigger alarm. Everything feels manageable. Everything feels under control. Until the end of the month arrives. And there's less room than expected. Not because of one bad decision, but because of how many normal ones happen without being noticed. The problem isn't any single expense. On its own, each cost looks reasonable, affordable, justified. Rent that fits the market. Bills that match the average. Spending that stays within the limits people talk about. Nothing here looks dangerous. That's why it doesn't trigger concern. The pressure doesn't come from one decision. It comes from how often the same kind of decision repeats. Day after day, week after week, month after month. Each choice is small enough to ignore. Each payment is familiar enough to feel safe. And because it feels safe, it doesn't get questioned. Normal spending isn't designed to feel expensive. It's designed to feel manageable. The system depends on that feeling. Costs are spread out. Payments are divided. Commitments are layered slowly. So nothing ever feels like too much. Until everything together does. What makes it heavy isn't size. It's density. Too many obligations stacked close together. Too many fixed costs competing for the same space. Money doesn't disappear suddenly. It gets allocated before it arrives. By the time it shows up, most of it already has a destination. That's why the account feels tight, even when nothing went wrong. Not because of a mistake, but because there's very little room left to absorb anything unexpected. Normal life isn't expensive because it's extravagant. It's expensive because it's full of commitments that repeat, full of costs that don't pause, full of decisions that once felt optional and now feel permanent. And once spending reaches that point, the feeling changes. Not panic, not crisis, just a constant awareness that there isn't much space left. There's a reason this kind of spending feels responsible. It's predictable. It's familiar. It reduces uncertainty. The brain prefers that. When costs are known, the mind relaxes. There are no surprises, no sudden decisions, no need to reevaluate. Safe spending creates the feeling of control. Fixed payments feel easier than flexible ones. Recurring costs feel calmer than irregular expenses. Commitments feel better than constant choices, even when those commitments are expensive. The brain isn't optimizing for money. It's optimizing for stability. That's why predictable costs feel lighter than uncertain ones, even if they take up more space. Comfort plays a role too. Convenience removes friction. Automation removes attention. And when attention disappears, so does resistance. The spending doesn't feel like spending anymore. It feels like infrastructure, something that has to exist for life to keep running smoothly. That's why many costs stop being questioned. Not because they're cheap, but because they're stable. Safe. Spending promises relief from mental effort, from constant decision-making, from risk. And the brain accepts that trade quietly. Over time, responsibility becomes rigidity. Flexibility disappears. Margins shrink, but the feeling remains calm until something changes, until something unexpected shows up, and suddenly, the lack of space becomes visible. Not because spending was reckless, but because it was designed to feel harmless. Imagine two people living very similar lives. They earn roughly the same. They work similar hours. They live in similar neighborhoods. From the outside, nothing really separates them. Both make reasonable choices. Both avoid extremes. Both try to be responsible with money. But their financial experience feels very different. One feels constant pressure. The other feels some breathing room. Not because one is smarter. Not because one takes bigger risks. The difference shows up in how normal costs are arranged. One life is built around fixed commitments. Rent locked in. Payments stacked. Subscriptions layered on top of each other. Everything is predictable. Everything is automatic. Money arrives already assigned. Before it can be used, it's already spoken for. The other life looks just as normal. But fewer things are locked in permanently. Costs still exist. Spending still happens. But there's more space between obligations. Nothing dramatic separates them. No single decision explains the gap. It's the structure. One routine leaves no room to adjust. The other leaves a little. And that difference changes how money feels every single month. Not richer, not poorer, just lighter. This is where the pressure starts to show. Not as panic, not as crisis, as a constant awareness in the background. Money feels tight, even when nothing is technically wrong. Bills are paid. Income is steady. There's no obvious emergency. And yet, there's a sense of caution that never fully turns off. Small decisions carry weight. Unexpected costs feel bigger than they should. Plans get filtered through one quiet question. Can this fit right now? It's not fear. It's restraint. A feeling that there's very little room for error. Because most of the money is already accounted for. Any change feels disruptive. The pressure doesn't come from spending too much. It comes from having too little flexibility. Everything works, but everything is tight. There's no margin to absorb surprises without stress. No space to adjust without rearranging something else. That's why the pressure feels constant. It never fully releases. Even good news gets measured. Even opportunities feel expensive. Not because of their price, but because of what they would displace. This kind of pressure doesn't show up on statements. It doesn't have a label, but it shapes behavior quietly. People become cautious without realizing why. Decisions get delayed. Options feel limited. Not because money is gone, but because it's already spoken for. There's no obvious moment when this becomes a problem. No clear line where normal life suddenly turns expensive. It happens gradually, quietly, through routines that feel responsible, through commitments that feel safe, through choices that make sense on their own. Nothing here looks like a mistake. Nothing feels reckless, and that's why it's hard to notice. The cost isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up as tightness, as hesitation, as the feeling that money is always already assigned. Normal life doesn't feel expensive because of luxury. It feels expensive because of structure, because so much is fixed, because flexibility disappears without being missed, because comfort fills the space where margin used to be. Most people don't question this, not because they don't care, but because everything is working. And when everything works, there's nothing urgent to fix, just a quiet awareness. That normal comes with a price. Not all at once, not in obvious ways, but month after month, decision after decision. And over time, that quiet cost becomes part of the background, unnoticed, accepted, normal.